Next week, Valerie comes in to talk about her take-home thesis. Since we've been talking about pressure points, and we went through the research and analysis, which you recall I mentioned was one of the two main places where you're concentrating on coming up with your contribution on the thesis as opposed to borrowing things from other people. The other pressure point, remember I mentioned, was the application, where you're looking at applications of research. So I'm going to begin to move into that a little bit and cover the second component that I think is really an important aspect of the thesis. And what I want to do as a prologue to this is just put a little reminder diagram on the board that continues to hopefully bring to mind what the overall flow and logic and sequence and connectivity of the thesis is. So I'm going to start with the big picture, then I'm going to zero in on a piece of it, which is the application. The heart of the thesis is to look carefully at something. And then to look at architectural implications of that. Or the architectural manifestations. That's really the core of the thesis. This was the scholarship, the research and analysis, where whatever you chose to look at, this is where you're pushing into it. And then the second piece of this is to look at the architectural implications of that. That's really the heart of the thesis, and that's why I continue to mention that two pressure points for these two things. Now, we know in addition to that, we've got some other pieces. We've got an introduction. And that essentially is a transition into the thesis and an overview of the thesis. That's really what the introduction is for. Take somebody who doesn't know anything about your thesis by the hand, gradually move them into it, and then give them a quick walk around the whole thing. And then at the other end, we know we've got conclusions, which is you reflecting on it. The main wisdom, the main lessons. Oftentimes there's a critique of your own work there. We've been over all that stuff. So this is first level work. These are second level work. And then we have homework, where you better get smart about it, and that's your literature search, or literature review. You don't just wade into this, you got to get ready. And whether it goes here or here, you also are looking at examples of this bridging having been made, and that's your present study. So that's really the thesis in a nutshell. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the minutiae of the pieces of the thesis and the subcategories and all that, which still need to be there. But I think it's fruitful once in a while to just back off and look at the big picture and look at the big chunks. And these generally are the big chunks, no matter what you're naming them, and no matter how you're individually configuring your take on what these things are and what's in there. I can't think of a thesis that's ever been done that doesn't have these beds covered in some form. So before I move to this, which is going to be what we concentrate on in the next class or two, does any of this raise issues for you guys, just in terms of the chunks, the purposes, the flow, the relationships? All right, now let's move into this. I'm going to concentrate now on what we've been calling the application. The application tends to have three big zones in it. One's the introduction, and it's actually the course, the introduction, the program, the concept work, and then the scheme itself. So these would be, for me anyway, the subcategories that form secondary title types under application. And I keep reminding us that I'm putting my category system up here. I want to encourage you guys to tailor this to the particulars of your thesis and to the kind of nomenclature that you tend to employ. So the introduction is going to have things like building type, the relation to the thesis theme, or themes. I'm going to come back and talk about each one of these things in a second. Relation to site choice. You'll find what I mean by that in a second. So this is basically easing people into the application chapter. So the application chapter doesn't want to just open the page and bang, there's a building. You have to reason and talk your way into this so that people, again, like introductions to the whole thing, are taken by the hand and eased into it and talked to or talked with about why this building, why this site, what's this got to do with pieces. So you all are in the process now of thinking about what kind of project you want to do. And you're also hopefully thinking about how that project relates to the thesis theme. Why is it a good building type choice? One of these, if this scholarship has been concentrating on this stuff, what's the match there? And so you need to be thinking about and reasoning and writing about and talking to the chair about the appropriateness, the fit between the kind of project you want to do and what it is you've been studying. And we've talked about it, and it stands to reason this is no great news, that it can't just be anything and everything. In many cases, the building type also has a relationship to the kind of site you choose. In other words, the kind of site you choose can also be to some degree related to the thesis theme. You study something ecological, let's say. Nobody in there, I don't think, is studying anything in terms of historic preservation, but you can imagine thesis themes where you better not only be careful about the building you choose, but you also better be careful about where you're saying you're going to put it. And so in the same way that any building is not okay, the same thing is true in many cases that not any site is okay. So there's got to be some argument and explanation on why this building and why it wants to go there. And in both cases, those tend to be related to the thesis theme. Sometimes building type, this is actually related to both things, related to thesis steam. It's also related to building type. Because in a lot of cases, the building type, you think about it, it really can't go anywhere. If you're entertaining some sort of an urban-based issue, stick it in the boonies, for example, doesn't make sense. You wouldn't put a building that doesn't belong downtown on a downtown site. So those tend to be some issues that can serve to begin to transition somebody into your application check. Programs that you're running in programming, or you will soon, programs can really go on and on and on and on, all kinds of information types. For me, in the thesis, you don't need a full-blown program, but you do need some programmatic information. In other words, in the same way that I don't think it's a good idea to open an application chapter and begin to see building, it also doesn't make sense to begin to see building without explaining a little bit about what's in it and why this is in it. So the kinds of things that might be happening in the program would be things like your general operation. In other words, what generally happens there. A list of the departments that make the building up, the spaces per department, together with the square footage, the total square footages, some sort of an adjacency treatment, could be just a bubble diagram. Just something like that, just some sort of a skeleton, bare bones depiction of what's going on inside this thing. Now, in the same way that site might be tied in a very important way to the piece of steam, this might also warrant more than just casual attention to create enough stuff to stick in the building. It could be, for example, that what you say is happening and how you allocate your square footages, that the internal workings of this building are very strongly tied to your piece of steam, in which case you better be thinking very carefully about these things too. But I would say that would be a good example of an outline program that didn't just go on and on and on and on about what's going to be in the building. To the extent that the programmatic information wants to be expanded because of your piece of steam, let's just say, think of an example. Several years ago, there was a student who had an aunt or a grandma who had Alzheimer's. And so she took on special populations. She studied that disease. And she set herself about designing environments an environment that was tailored to that special population. Well, then you could add very easily here this course on the population group and the occupancy group. That would be an example of tailoring this to the pieces. Then I'm thinking you could actually combine the concept of scheme, but for my money, it's useful to separate it so that your generative work is not mixed up with your final work. So what kinds of things might be a concept division of an application check? This would be where your translation exercise might be. This might be where your site organization diagrams might be. Your building organization diagrams. Form RT models. and then some sort of a conceptual synthesis. So this is all sort of party, diagram, exploratory. Oftentimes in this section, a designer will have not just the conceptual thinking that wound up being used in the scheme, but we'll also be showing options and explorations and sort of playful spin-outs and all the work to get this to this is what goes into it. It's your conceptual language translation from your scholarship to the physicality of the scheme itself. So to the extent that you're studying, let's say, some issues of this would be, for example, where you would be doing your little abstract sculptures or diagrams or whatever form of expression you have chosen to choose to use that we're trying to find ways of physicalizing your scholarship. The scheme is probably the most familiar aspect that you're used to doing projects, and so all the relevant drawings and models. This is product, and that's going to be tailored to the specifics of your scheme. I think this is a good place too to talk about your use of lessons. One of the things I've been trying to talk you guys into is to end your literature review with extracted lessons and end your precedent study with extracted lessons. This would be where you talk about how you put those lessons into play. And so your scheme itself is not just drawings and models. There can be some narrative in there as well. And then talking about the key ideas you used, and then ending with some sort of reflection on the whole thing. This reflection is just about the scheme itself. The reflection that happens over here and concludes is the whole piece. So this is the product itself. And you thinking about the product itself and thinking about what it was like to take your scholarship and somehow get it expressed in some sort of physical manifestation. So in the same way I've been giving you guys sample content types and sample structure strategies for the thesis, this could be a way to at least begin to envision what the nature of this chapter might be in the thesis. And you may be sitting there thinking, okay, my thesis is about this. I'm going to change this name to that. I won't have this, but I will have that. So as before, I want to encourage you guys to tailor this. But what I'm hoping too at the same time is you're going to be tailoring it. You're not going to just be crossing things out because you don't want to do them, because I have a hard time imagining a well-done thesis and not treating this stuff somehow, squaring up to it and addressing these issues somehow. To me, it's not a great thesis if I open the architectural implications chapter and I just start seeing scheme, and there really isn't anything about how we got here, how the issues were mobilized and translated into this. There's no backing off or reflecting. If this is going to be a true thesis and not just a regular design studio project, to me the product has to be wrapped in reflection, logic, and explanation of events. That wants to be in there somehow. So that's a quick walk around, or at least a look at what the architectural implications might be. And I'm going to move to some other issues in a minute, but I want to stop here to see whether this raises questions for you guys and think about Okay, now what I want to do is I want to start us thinking about this. So the piece I want you to turn in next Friday is going to be this, this, this. This can be brief. You don't need to do your total here. Shoot to have the introduction to the program underway. Obviously, you're not doing this yet, although I'm talking to a couple of students now who are beginning to embark on this. In other words, they're into their issues enough to be confident they can begin to look at some exploratory transformation. So I'm not going to ask for that yet. But to me, you can be thinking about this. And I'm not going to say, well, once you turn it in, you can't change your mind. But I want to get you turned square up to the issue of what are you going to do. I think some of you are further along in making that deliberation than others. But everybody, at this point, I want you to think about it and see how much of this you can get done for next Friday. So we get this piece, at least this aspect of this piece, up and running and not let it sit on the sidelines too long. And I know some of you will be more confident in taking a crack at that than others, but I want you all to take a crack at it whether you're feeling ready enough, realizing that everything we do, particularly early on, is draft and think piece and exploratory and provisional, negotiable. That seems easy. What I want to do next, if there are no questions about this, is I want to talk in general about design and designing. So what I just addressed here is the upfront pieces and kind of thinking and work that needs to happen directly in relation to the pieces. But for both the scholarship and for the designing, at some point I'm going to back off and look at larger contextual issues within which these things float. What I'm going to move to next, to the extent I can in class, is talk about design in general, design theory in general, designing as an activity in general. And then once we've treated that, we'll move back over here to the scholarship and talk about architectural research in general and research in general. So we'll begin to see the larger environments or the larger contextual fields within which your scholarship sits and within which your application sits. One reason why I want to do that is I think we get clearer what these things are in here to the extent that we discuss and think about and mull over the company that keep. So I want to make sure we don't just stay product oriented and sort of production oriented here, but we back off and look at some larger pictures. And ultimately I'm going to be backing off and talking about some philosophical issues here, which are several levels distant from the viewing of the pieces itself. So that's just kind of a heads up that in the next few classes, starting today and next time we meet in the shop talk session, we're going to be talking about larger contextual things, not so much about doing the pieces itself.
Even the children, the card size and the card building size are really cool.
Right, that's good.
Then how would you know if you are children the card size and the card building size?
Correct.
Yeah.
You don't know. You just think about it as well as you can, and you commit to it and talk about it.
Because for me, I think I established the fact that it's my pieces but the building type is kind of like a problem. Like I'm working to see if it fits the concept for the people.
Right, because you're thinking about uses and that kind of thing. Okay, well, this is going to force the issue. And so the best thinking you can do at the time, do it to produce that. Even though you turned it in and you go, this is still wobbly down here, and I'll go, okay, yeah, I know it's wobbly, but I still want you to get it. You'll find too, this may sound strange, this culture, especially in academic culture, makes a big deal of logic where you go ready, aim, fire. Forcing the issue here is fire, aim, ready, where you just muddle into something, and the process of muddling begins to help you clarify. Okay, so is it going to be a serious final commitment to what it is? No, it isn't. Is it going to be your best thinking at the time? Yes, it should be. Might you change your mind? Yes, but not necessarily. And so, committing to it, at least in a provisional way, is going to force your mind and your whole consciousness to square up to it. You'll pay another kind of attention because white actually gives you something to black than you do just let it sit under the tree and think about it. You have another question?
No. What I realized is that when I write it down behind the scene, I keep thinking about it is not that I'm handling my, it's just the best answer to the solution. Is there something else that could make it better? So like, even for the last time when I'm doing the diagram, I realized that some of the stuff, like when I did further research, is not what I wanted. So I went back this week and I kind of like changed the few of the. So that's why I asked, how do you know like when is it time to say enough is enough, like this is what it's.
It's the same thing as working on painting, building, composition, and music. There are two things going on. One's inside and one's outside. Outside, deadlines will come up and say, I'm taking it away. It's time to commit. Wishy-washiness is over, no matter whether you're comfortable or not. The university says the deadline was here. So that's an outside force. The inside force is just reading your stuff. Does it feel resolved? Does it feel satisfied? Does it feel complete? Can you think of anything else that would make it better? Or are the things you're thinking about really just appendages, marginal, superfluous things that are not really essential to the flow and the explanation? Where maybe you're running scared, it's only 10 pages, you think it should be 10, so you're going to write 10 more, whether they're relevant or not. That kind of thing. That's a gut feeling. In art, the version of that is, if I'm working on a painting, it takes me months to finish it because I'll put in a session and I'll prop it up, and every day I'll walk by it and look at it. And if something starts to make me twitch, I begin to form my agenda for the next session. And by the time I've looked at it a week, I know what I want to do next. If I walk by it for a week and I go, I can't think of anything else to do with that, I'm done. There's no formula, there's no logic, it's a feeling. You'll probably know, your chair will help you know. The chair will say, hey, you've done it, put right. Now you're complicating it. You had a good soup and now you put too much stuff in it. Now it's ruined. So there's not a tidy answer for that. So I can only use those words to respond. You know, read yourself, and hopefully you've got the sensitivity to help people for it. As long as you're bothered by it, and it's a bother that's true to the unfoldment of it, and it's not just a bother that you're scared of the thesis passage in general, and it's just kind of this bag of angst you're carrying around for 2 semesters. Then you should be responding to it. Now, what is it that's bothering me? You've already said there's some things about your diagram that bother you. You knew what they were. You found what they were. That's perfect. You know, you're refining, you're adjusting, you're modifying. Karl Popper, the British scientific philosopher, said, "No one arrives at excellence right off the bat. You commit to something that's a muddle, and then you start tinkering with it and move it to excellence." So this can be your best shot at whatever your muddle is. It gives us something to talk about and gives you and shares. Plus, it forces your mind to wrestle with the issue. So that's a really good question. That's true to any process. True to cooking a meal, true to doing a thesis, doing a painting. Doesn't matter what it is. When are you finished? What other questions come up about this? How many of you are fairly comfortable, at least in the neighborhood, of what you want to do and where you want to do it? You should have your hand up. Okay, so about 2/3 of it. So it's time to think about it. Now it's predicated on the fact that you're immersed enough in this that you have some feel for appropriateness. So it's going to be probably more uncomfortable to do what I'm asking you to do if you're still wobbling radically over here. You've got to have some grip on this. There doesn't need to be a super tight grip. Nothing but grip here to have a feel for what kind of building a project feels like an appropriate rollout or printout or exploration based upon vision. But even if this is wobbling, I still need to do that shot. Sometimes I think you were a case in point. Forcing the issue and coming down here and admitting to this can sometimes cause you to clarify what this is. Where you think, okay, this right now is a really tenuous relationship. I'm going to go ahead and commit to something that feels like this. And then by wrestling with what this is, it helps you figure out the focusing over here that might help you clarify here. This is another example of trying to work it all together. And rather than doing this, then this, and this, and this, and this, but getting it all up and running and looking at the dialogue and conversation and activities that happen across these different zones of effort, let's call it, different areas of labor within the thesis passage. Because I think they really do and can help one another. And beyond that, it's what I keep meaning by an integrated tapestry rather than a patchwork of individual separate exercises. There's no carryover, there's no integration, there's no weaving happening across these things. We want that weaving. So I'll look to see whatever those things are today. That'll be the day that Valerie talks. So I'll just collect them on the day when I'm sure she's not so probably rather than working into this and not finishing the conversation, I'm going to wait until next Wednesday to do this. That's Monday to that report. Anything else with respect to progress pieces? Oh, I know. I wanted to ask you guys something. I'm thinking about my response to the faculty concerns that were voiced in the meeting. One of the things that I'm thinking about doing, a couple of them asked, well, can you tell us what you're asking them to turn into? So we can have a feel for at least beginning products that we might at least track or see are beginning to happen and be produced. Not that they're going to say, okay, you gave it to White, why don't you give me a copy? They just want to track what it is we're doing in here and how the class is unfolding. So that's one thing I'm thinking about doing, which really doesn't affect you. But what does affect you is a couple of them said, well, what about letting us know when the various students are presenting on Monday so that we can come in if we're interested in something, or the chair can come in and listen to you guys report. So my question is this. Well, I'm thinking two thoughts, and I'm putting myself in your chair. One thought I would think was, no, I don't want to do that because this is kind of a private, just among the group thing. I'm comfortable laying my dirty laundry on the table, and I'm not quite sure I want to do that in front of the faculty. The other one would be, sure, come one, come all, let them join and pray, let's hear what they have to say. Maybe somebody will say something that will get them blocked. So give me some feedback here. What's your feeling when I say that might be?
I mean, I do like the whole private, just putting your laundry out there. I don't mind them coming in as long as they know that we're still in the process of working. Because if they start drilling us with final, like this is the final presentation, that's what throws us off. Because then we're going to get confused and start worrying about, when we know this is, we're still working on this project. That's the only thing I would say.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to keep it private. I mean, I'm just saying as far as, like you said, laying it out there and being honest and open about the troubles we're having. I think we all kind of understand when we have outside influences, they might not know where we should have to travel.
But the rest of you guys, yeah.
I think it might be good if the person, you could probably have a limit on how many professors come in. Maybe like one or two. Instead of like,
it's not going to be a big crowd. And a lot of them won't check us up on anyway.
Yeah. And then I was thinking if it's possible, say I present Monday, like if professors were going to come, maybe the professor that doesn't show up is my chairperson. Just in case the other professors have different views that might be good for me that I haven't thought about. Just in case.
Well, you guys know when we first started talking about it, when you learn when you were presenting, you're free to invite your chair. That's just a standing thing. So far, everybody's done it. Which gives a little feel for how you feel about that.
Everybody wants your
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
But he knows that, let me with him all the time that where we're at. So.
Okay. So you got contact there. How about the rest of you guys? How are you feeling about it?
Well, your chairs though.
Two of you guys are yourself. So, do we keep this optional then? That if you feel like you want some feedback for your session, you invite not only your chair, but anybody else who you think might give you interesting feedback, and you be in charge of whether they come or not. Sounds good. Yeah. That way I don't air it out there and roll the dice, and those of you who are tight about it, wind up with a session that, is your worst fear. Just in terms of how it goes. I think the concern is a valid one. It's like juries, you can have a in-process pinup, and everything's still in progress and tentative and exploratory. The but you can still get comments that are coming at you as though it should have been resolved. Or because you're still somewhat murky in areas, the faculty will sense the vacuum and configure it for you. Here's a way to get that area shaped up, which you may or may not want to do. So I'm hearing enough doubt that I'm going to leave it optional. I'm not going to publish the list of presentation dates and students that go there. And I'm going to leave it up to you individually to either invite or not invite. But what I want to add to this is not just inviting your chair, if that feels right, but also inviting other faculty, like maybe the rest of your committee, or even people who are not on the committee, who you think might be offering some input. I'll say too that you don't want too many, because there's not going to be that much airtime for two of you presenting at a time. And like a jury that's got too many jurors on it, there's not enough airtime for everybody really to have full say, and then they wonder why they're there, or they're frustrated if they have something to say, but they get forward. So I wouldn't have more than 2 or 3. 1, maybe 2, maximum 3, something like that. So that's how I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it that you guys will go ahead and charge it. Okay, Steve Monday.
I have a question. Are they expecting more attention from us? No, more attention from us as students? Because I know last semester a lot of people were talking about how pressurized it was for